They're all well exercised. Good. And so is Dr. Parker, who's impressed. So yeah, still doing it. So my topic today is one that's really near and dear to my heart, and that is encouraging family caregivers and family members of persons who are living with dementia to become involved in research about you. Clearly, the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center here at Emory, the Goizueta Center, sees as its principal focus the development of treatments and hopefully cure for prevention methods related to Alzheimer's and other dementias. But while all that's going on, and acknowledging the enthusiasm that we all feel about recent developments in those areas, you know, the reality is that caregiving, the care that's provided by families, is going to be continue to be the main treatment option for persons living with dementia. Families and friends are going to continue to be the core healthcare system for the care of dementia. So think about that. Instead of thinking of individuals and saying, oh, dad is taking care of mom, or my sister-in-law is taking care of my father, which makes it sound like such a down-home kind of thing. Think about it as you are the healthcare system for the person living with dementia. Yeah, there are people out there that are physicians and nurses and occupational therapists. And there are systems like Emory or the Cognitive Empowerment Program. But think about how many hours in a year a person living with dementia interacts with any of those people versus the number of hours in a day that the person interacts with the family caregiver. So you are critical. You are the core. You are the center of care. We spend 4 years training a physician up to a point where she can then enter a residency program that will extend for 3 or 4 years, depending on the specialty, or 6 in some cases. And then, you know, anywhere from 2 to 6 more years in a fellowship to become, you know, one of the Jim Laws of the world. How much time do we spend training family caregivers? So when we talk about research for family caregivers at Emory or elsewhere, what we're really talking about is figuring out ways to provide you with better skills for providing the care that you provide, to provide you with better ways to take care of yourself, to provide you with better ways to interact with that, that formal care system and other kinds of care resources in the community so that you can more effectively use those resources and maybe even give yourself a break. So none of us is born with those kind of innate skills and knowledge for caregiving, for self-care, for navigating the healthcare system. And so when we come on week after week and we say there's this program or that program for research on caregiving, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about trying to figure out better ways of making you better at what you do and better ways of helping you to get through the experience of caregiving, both in as safe a way and really as satisfying a way. One of the things I think we don't emphasize enough is that enough in our work is that caregivers really should feel an enormous sense of gratification and reward from what they do. But we don't emphasize that enough. And often what we look at is, well, how do we lower the amount of burden? We need to do that. We need to lower burden, but we also need to increase reward and satisfaction. So all I want to do today is talk about briefly four really programs of research that are going on, and give you an email address so that you can find out more about these programs if you're interested. So I think one of the first one is Caregiving During Crisis. These first four are all being developed here at Emory by Emory investigators. So the first one, Caregiving During Crisis, is a fully online program. You take it at your own pace, you use it at your own time, and it prepares you to continue to be safe during a pandemic. So there's infection control and protection information. There's a very large segment on navigating the healthcare system. Who's who does what, how do you figure out with whom to speak? How do you present yourself effectively to a busy healthcare provider? And what are some things you need to do to prepare in case you need to interact with the healthcare system in an emergency? And the third part of this program is a very short course in managing the day with a person and for a person living with dementia. So that course is about to open, and we will be actively enrolling, we hope, as many as 100 individuals over the next really 2 or 3 months. The second program is called Telesavvy at Home. This is a program, again, an online program. So we've all learned how to live online, and now we're doing research about programs for you that are online. So this is a program that is a much broader, more detailed how to manage the day of a person living with dementia. It's built on the in-person Savvy Caregiver program that we offer at Emory, and it's built also on another Telesavvy program that we just finished testing. That will be available in a couple of months, but we're looking for, I think, 60 or so caregivers to take part in that. This is one that neither of these, by the way, do you have to live in the Atlanta area? These are online. If you have relatives in Hawaii and they're doing this caregiving, they're absolutely eligible. Friends or relatives in Hawaii, and I will personally deliver the program to them there. The third is Caregiving While Black. This is a program that's being developed specifically for African American caregivers, with a particular focus on dealing with the systemic health disparities in the healthcare system, and ways to navigate that system, which is not obviously not an even playground. It also has portions like Caregiving During Crisis focused on infection control and prevention and managing the day. The fourth program, which is in development, is Equity in Caregiving. And here, this is a program specifically focused on the LGBTQ community. Members of that community who are serving in a caregiving role. And again, a lot of the unique conditions that might prevail in that kind of a caregiving situation. Those are four that are going on here. There are other online caregiver programs that we can put you in contact with. But if you are interested in any information about any of these, here's the address: caregiving.mastery@emory.edu. So it's all of these are about caregiving mastery, and the email address is caregiving.mastery@emory.edu. Send in questions. We're more than happy to reach out to you if you have questions, give you more information, and put you on the queue to be part of these projects. So, any questions I can field?
One quick question, Dr. Hepburn. You talked about how physicians have to prepare. They have some up to, a decade of exposure and experience just to practice. But many times caregivers are thrust into this role. And so what is one thing that you would, one piece of sage advice you'd give a new caregiver of a person living with dementia?
I would emphasize the word that you used. To understand this is a role. You may have been thrust there because of a relationship or cultural expectation. But when you're there, you're in a role that could be described, it could have a job description, and it's pretty clinical in nature. And as such, you really need to acquire the skills and knowledge and the sense that I can do this job, the sense of competence and confidence. So to approach it as something different from being a daughter-in-law, or a husband and wife, though those things are still true. Now you have a task, and you need to acquire the skills for that task.
And I think people will take for granted, like, oh, caregiving, that comes with ease. I think there's a lot of dynamics that come into play, and that's why the research is critical.
Yeah, I often think how, after 40 some years of marriage, my wife and I can communicate exquisitely in nonverbal ways. I can read her, raising of an eyebrow as can she. If I become demented and she raises her eyebrow that way, I won't know what she's talking about. And I might become agitated. And I won't be able to express that back to her. And unless she understands that the way that communication used to work isn't working any longer, and I have to develop a new set of strategies, unless she understands that and acquires that skill, we're going to be at loggerheads with one another. I'm going to be agitated and just annoying as hell. And she'll be frustrated. So all of those things we take for granted in our normal interactions, when dementia enters the picture, the caregiver has to make adjustments based on knowledge and awareness and skill.
And one final question from a viewer: are the workshops, are they research models, or this just sort of a support group? Or
no, thank you. That's what we do here. We do research. There are support groups, but we're very interested to see, does caregiving during crisis, does caregiving while Black, does equity in caregiving, do these things really promote a sense of greater knowledge and skill, and a sense of greater competence? Because if they do, then we can share them with the broader public. We can say, look, here's something that's evidence-based, this really works, and make it more available to people. So by participating in the research, there may be some benefit if the programs work, and we think they will, we hope that they will, but there's also beneficence involved. You're helping develop something that can be shared with other caregivers.
Absolutely. Okay, well, can you tell us the email address once again, and then we will turn it over to Dr. Dunlop.
There it is. caregiving.mastery@emory.edu. And I guess I could post this in the chat, couldn't I?
Yes. Oh, please. Thank you so much.
See, I'm getting more sophisticated.
As the weeks go on. Okay, Dr. Dunlop, welcome.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Hello, I'm giving you the remote.
Okay,
And
fantastic. Does the screen look okay?
I think I'm sharing my screen, but if you want to share yours, just let me know.
Okay. I don't think I'll be able to control your screen, so probably best if I share my screen then.
Here we go.
So, okay. Still not able to share the screen though, unfortunately. Apologize for my hair. That workout John Lewis gave me really shook my hair up a lot there. So.
Okay. Let's
Go. It'll work now. That's it. Okay. So hopefully you can all see that. Is that right, Cornelia?
Well, can you put it in presenter mode?
Yep. How's that?
Just thinking about it. Yeah, I would click it one more time.
No.
Okay, maybe just the square down at the bottom next to in the lower right next to the.
Yeah. All right, I'll tell you what. So let's have you show the slides and I'll just tell you when to click. How's that sound?
Okay, that works.
Sorry about that, everybody.
Well, you can introduce your topic and I will.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about cognition as it relates to depression, because a lot of people who get depressed have symptoms of cognitive impairment, meaning they're not thinking as clearly as they normally do. And that's associated with a impaired function at work, even in hobbies and doing things for pleasure. And sometimes people feel like I've got early onset Alzheimer's or some other cognitive problem, when in fact it really is all about depression. And what I want to talk to you today about is what we think happens in the brain when the cognition gets impaired when people are depressed. So in a sense, I'm going to be showing you a biomarker of cognitive impairment in people with depression. So this slide shows some of the things that people often complain of when they have depression. They can have complaints of short-term memory. They can't focus to read or watch TV. They can't make up their mind about things. They're trying to focus on something and all these negative thoughts get in the way, and negative thoughts about themselves or about their future. Sometimes they get stuck thinking about the past. And a lot of times it's just kind of a slowed thinking or feeling like they're in a fog, like they just can't think their way through things. Not everybody with depression gets this, but it is a very common symptom of people with depression. And so you can see these kinds of symptoms can make people wonder, well, am I getting demented? But really, it's just the depression. So click the next slide, please. So there's a network in the brain that I'm going to talk about called the cognitive control network. Sometimes it's called the central executive network. And what I want you to understand about the brain is that it isn't just like one region of the brain does one thing. The brain is a series of connected regions that we call networks. So the brain is constantly communicating with other parts. The parts of the brain are constantly communicating with other parts of the brain to achieve specific functions. And I'm going to show you two key networks that are important for depression. And I really want to focus on this central executive network to begin with. This network is involved in how we attend to things, how we hold things in our memory, called working memory. Like if I'm trying to keep a list of grocery items in my mind, that's working memory. It helps us inhibit our initial responses to things so we kind of aren't too impulsive. And it's also where we think through problems and help solve them. So I'm going to show you a couple pictures of the brain. Go ahead and click again. What I'm going to show you is imagine a slice through the brain coming through the eyeballs all the way to the back. And like we're taking the lid off the brain. That's the image you're going to see next. Go ahead, Cornelia. And this is an fMRI, so a magnetic resonance imaging, a brain imaging study, looking at what parts of the brain are involved in this central executive network. And what's really become very clear now is that there's a bilateral, so both sides of the brain, that connects the front and the back. This is where we're doing all that stuff I've written on there: control of attention, working memory. This is all being processed through this central executive network. These two parts of the brain communicate to each other and do all that processing. This is a different network than the next one I'm going to show you. Go ahead, Cornelia, which is the default mode network. This is what our brain is doing when it's doing nothing. So our brain is never really doing nothing. It's actually constantly internally focused. And that's what this network represents. This is the midline of the brain to the middle of the back of the brain, and then some lower parts in the parietal lobe. When we are focused on ourselves, reminiscing, daydreaming, not paying attention to the outside world, not solving problems, this is the network in the brain that is active. What we've learned is that when people are depressed, this default mode network in blue gets ramped up, and people are really internally focused and inadequately externally focused. Go ahead and click, Cornelia. So this is the same network shown in a 3D image of the brain. So that green network on top, that's that central executive network that was in red on the previous page. I'm sorry, the colors don't carry through, but that's our thinking network right there. And what that black arrow represents in that part of the brain that's connecting on that brain is that that connection is weaker. There's less strength of connectivity in depressed people in this network. It just doesn't work as well. And that likely leads to a lot of those cognitive complaints of being slowed, not being able to pay attention. Is because this network is weaker. Now, in the bottom left corner there, you see the default mode network. And what that white arrow connecting them and the stronger word says is that the default mode network is connecting more strongly to the central executive network. Normally, these two networks should not be interfering with each other. One should be active and the other one off, and vice versa. But in depression, it gets mixed up. And this internally focused network kind of interferes with the central executive network. So you can't focus as much on the outside and work that information effectively because you're wrapped up on the inside. That's what we've learned from these brain imaging studies of depression. This is the depressed brain. It's excessively inwardly focused and leads to a weakening of the externally focused problem-solving attention parts of the brain. And that's this key discovery. It's really just been the last 5 or 6 years that we understand this is part of how the brain is going wrong in depression. Another part of depression, go ahead and click, Cornelia, is people can have trouble remembering things that have happened recently. And so this is the role of the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is important for episodic memory, which is what happened, where, and when. That's different from working memory, where you kind of keep track of a list. This is like your life experiences. And the hippocampus is important for encoding and remembering those experiences. Click again, Cornelia. The hippocampus is also important, though, for giving us context to what's happening. Most importantly, for inhibiting our fear responses when fear would not be appropriate. An example I like to give is walking down a street and meeting a pirate. Normally, that would induce fear if it was 1492 Spain. Like, that would be a pirate to be afraid of. But if it's 2019 Mardi Gras in New Orleans, you're not going to be fearful. It'll be fun. It's the hippocampus that is encoding the context in which that is happening and keeping the fear constrained because it's not appropriate for that situation. In PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, the hippocampus doesn't make that distinction very well, and people fear things they shouldn't fear. This is another area of research in the brain that's really made a lot of progress for us. So you can see, unlike those networks I was showing you, which are on the cortical parts of the brain, the higher level of the brain, the hippocampus is deep in the brain on both sides, but it does connect up to that central executive network where we do our thinking. Click the next slide, please. And click again. So what we know in major depressive disorder is that many people with major depression actually have smaller hippocampi than people who don't have depression. So in this slide, the red bars represent the size of the hippocampus on the left and right side. And the red bars are the depressed people, and the blue bars are healthy controls who aren't depressed. And you can see particularly on the right side that the hippocampus is smaller in depressed people. What we really haven't established is whether the hippocampus is smaller because people were born that way, and the hippocampus size is a biomarker for prediction of vulnerability for developing depression, or if the hippocampus actually shrinks through life as a result of stress-related factors as part of being depressed. So is it a biomarker for a risk for developing depression, or is it a biomarker of exposure to having been depressed and causing some shrinkage of the hippocampus? Click again, please, Cornelia. The same thing is found in PTSD. Here is here's images of the hippocampus, and the blue bars again are healthy controls, and the red bars are people with PTSD. And again, we see that the people with PTSD have smaller hippocampi, this time on both sides compared to the healthy controls. So this is an overlapping type of biological marker for both PTSD and depression, at least in some types of depression. Go ahead and click, Cornelia. So I just wanted to give that little brief introduction to how we think about cognition and the recent breakthroughs we've had in understanding how people's cognition goes wrong in depression. And I want to let you know about studies we're doing of major depression. We're using psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, to see if that can help people get better from depression who haven't gotten better with standard antidepressant treatments. Psilocybin may affect these networks, so particularly the default mode network, in ways that regular antidepressants can't. We're also doing a study of post-traumatic stress disorder. But in the fall, we expect to start a study of cognition in people with long COVID. So these are people who got COVID infection and have persisting symptoms, even though they're not actively infectious anymore. A common complaint in about 20% of these long COVID patients is that they really have trouble thinking, and we think their central executive network has been adversely affected by the illness, and we'll be studying a treatment for that. So there's some contact information there if you're interested in reaching out to us. But wanted to give you that little tidbit of where we are now with cognition and depression, and I'm happy to answer any questions at this point. Cornelia, are you there?
She's
Sorry,
there.
I was not muted. I was muted. Dr. Parker.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I think you did clarify the central and the default network. Is the study that you are advertising here, will that sort of pinpoint having to sort of get our thoughts together? Because I think when we hear depression, there's a stigma attached to it. And so what we're trying to do is normalize these interventions and expose our audience to the various interventions that are available. But can you talk a little bit more about the goal and the objective of the current study for clinical depression?
Yeah, that study is designed to see if we can help people recover who haven't been helped with existing antidepressants. So people who have tried 2 or more antidepressants and haven't gotten better, we believe psilocybin acts in a way differently than currently approved drugs to treat depression, and particularly by reducing the level of activity in the default mode network, that blue network I originally showed you. We think that that's going to have a direct effect on that network. It's done as part of a psychotherapy. I should mention that people do receive several sessions of psychotherapy as part of that treatment. But it's about reprocessing how our lived experiences should help us think about the future, the past, and their meaning to us. And we think that that may be a means by which people can improve from depression. We think cognition improves when depression improves. So we don't really have specific treatments for impaired cognition and depression, but we have treatments for depression generally. And when people's depression gets better, nearly always the cognition also also improves along with it.
Can you
There's
talk
a
a little
question.
bit, because the questions are rolling in.
Is the study accepting people with PTSD, Dr. Dunlop?
Yeah, not the depression study, but the post-traumatic stress disorder study is active right now, yes.
Okay.
And
Okay.
can you talk about the difference between depression and a concussion?
Yeah, so a concussion results from a direct injury to the head. So either a blow or a concussion wave, like a shock wave, that leads to some temporary loss of consciousness or altered consciousness. So it's an injury. A concussion is an injury to the brain. Depression is not an injury. It's a malfunctioning of the circuitry of the brain, similar to what I was showing you, that comes on without injury. So a concussion is a very rapid, immediate thing that occurs that people typically recover from with time. Depression is a gradual thing that builds over time and takes typically several months to recover from.
Okay, you have many questions. How does ADHD tie into depression? And does this, if you have MCI, can you be a participant in the study?
Okay, so ADHD is a risk factor for developing depression, as it is for anxiety disorders as well. The neurocircuitry for ADHD is being worked out, and it partially overlaps, but is also distinguishable from depression. So I wish I could be more specific about how they interact biologically. We just know that they're both associated with abnormal functioning in the networks responsible for processing attention and mood regulation. In terms of having mild cognitive impairment, that MCI would be exclusionary for our current studies, unfortunately.
Okay. I'm going to answer this one. It says, Dr. Dunlop, are primary care physicians aware of the studies on the hippocampus? And I guess this is one of the things that's important for people to know. A lot of the studies that we're advertising are not necessarily widely known by providers.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is, medicine has become a very big field, and primary care providers really are focused on keeping people well and treating their chronic illnesses and acute illnesses. And what we're talking about here is biomarker research, trying to advance to the next step of therapies beyond where we are today. So what I'm showing you isn't necessarily actionable at the level of your doctor to help treat you. Was hoping to help you understand a little bit more about how far we're getting in understanding the biology underlying these illnesses. It's not just like someone wants to be depressed or someone's too lazy to get out of bed. The brain is actually not firing in a way that allows the person to function effectively. And we're starting to understand exactly where those lesions are, where the brain is not working properly.
Thank you. I know you have to go see a patient, Dr. Dunlop, so thank you so much for appearing for us, and we'll move on. Happy clinic.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.
Hey, Dr. Parker, you have just a few minutes to dive right into your topic.
I think I'm going to make it a little short and sweet by just giving people an idea of what biomarkers are, because I think you got a whole lot of information today that was really, really important. So you can pull up one slide, go to the first one.
Okay, give me just a second to pull it up.
So you've heard a lot about biomarkers, and just for the sake of discussion so that you know, in research or even in clinical medicine, if you have cancer, for example, if we kill cancer cells with a chemotherapy, we're going to look for biomarkers, things in your blood, things on a radiologic image that tell us that disease is present or not present. So in Alzheimer's research, we look at biomarkers. The biomarkers we're mostly looking at right now are biomarkers in your cerebrospinal fluid. They are A-beta protein and tau proteins that are biomarkers in your cerebrospinal fluid that we look at. And if we find these proteins in your blood or where in your cerebrospinal fluid, we generally say, well, that person has biomarkers in his cerebrospinal fluid that indicate that somebody has Alzheimer's. So here's a definition. Biomarkers measure changes in the size and function of the brain. So for Alzheimer's research, there's some key biomarkers we look at. We look at biomarkers in the cerebrospinal fluid, as you see here, A beta proteins, tau proteins, and phospho-tau. Those things are measured by doing a lumbar puncture where we remove fluid from your spinal column and we analyze it for those proteins. The next slide is going to tell you something about radiologic biomarkers. So go to the next one. Okay, so in Alzheimer's research, when we're looking for evidence of disease, think about what Dr. Dunlop told you about the hippocampus, okay? The hippocampus shrinking or getting small is found on an MRI. So that's an imaging biomarker. So in Alzheimer's research, we're going to get an MRI. We're going to look at your hippocampus to see if it's shrunk or not. We're also going to look at other parts of your brain as listed there. We can do blood flow analysis to see how much blood is flowing to your brain. Poor blood flow to your brain would indicate that that brain's not working well. And then finally, you see something here called a PET scan. That's a super fancy X-ray, and there aren't very many in the country, and most of them are used in research. This is a PET scan that you use to look for a special tracer protein that marks the A beta and tau proteins that I just talked about. Different PET scans use different kinds of tracers to monitor evidence of disease. So the PET scan, if you have a positive PET scan in Alzheimer's disease, it generally indicates that we found evidence of A beta and tau proteins, and that's pretty much synonymous with Alzheimer's. So if you have a PET scan that shows you have A beta and tau proteins in your brain, that's more than likely indicative of the fact that you have Alzheimer's. So I'm going to stop right there and just say that here in our research, one of the things that we do that is not necessarily available in your medical doctor's office is we look for biomarkers that are consistent with neurodegenerative disease. And most of these biomarkers are found or monitored through research. It's only when it's been proven in research that it's effective, then we go to the FDA to get approval to say that this particular study, this biomarker should be managed and used to diagnose, manage, and monitor the treatment of Alzheimer's. We haven't gotten that yet for any of our biomarkers. Getting a lumbar puncture, getting an MRI, getting a PET scan can cost a lot of money, but that is part of what the process is for working things up. We're looking at research to develop a more easily accessible biomarker using your blood, so that you go to get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, we can just draw your blood. So we're not there yet with research. That's why we need your participation. Those of you who called in or sent in your questions about depression and other things, you're probably highly functional and we'd like you to be in some of our research. Surely there's something that you can participate in. We need healthy people and maybe not so healthy people to participate in research, in our research in Alzheimer's here, just so that we can better understand how best to diagnose this disease in the most efficacious and least expensive manner. Right now, we don't have a very efficacious and less expensive manner by which to monitor, evaluate, or trace diseases. That's why we're looking at people who don't have any evidence of the disease yet. We're looking at your blood, we're looking at your biomarkers. So depending on the study that you enroll in, they may be looking at a biomarker, they may be looking for a gene that they get from swabbing your mouth, getting it from your blood or some other body fluid. But biomarkers, all I need you to know is biomarkers are the way that doctors, that researchers follow or identify a disease process, how that disease process is progressing. And if you are in cancer, for example, there are lots of biomarkers that are used for cancer treatment, how well your body has responded to the chemotherapy treatment. So if you participate in a study here, chances are we're going to want to look at your biomarkers. If you're looking in a diagnostic study where we're following Alzheimer's research, yes, we're going to do a lumbar puncture. We're going to get cerebrospinal fluid for analysis. We're going to look at your blood. Yes, we're more likely going to get a radio image and MRI to look for these things. Are these diagnostic? Yes and no. We're still doing research. It's an inexact science. And a lot of what you're going to hear us talk about isn't something that your primary care doctor or even your city neurologist is going to be able to make available to you. With that, I'm going to close. but ask you again, beg you again, to please participate in research. And you're going to hear a lot more of this in the next couple of weeks because we're going to be doing face-to-face studies now. Pandemic is getting better. We're going to be up and running certainly by the end of the summer. And we want those of you who've been participating in our BrainTalk Lives to participate in our research. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parker. There's a couple of
I got
comments in chat. Okay, Whit, come on really quickly, and then we're gonna go over to Matt, and then we'll try to come back and do a little bit more Q&A if Dr. Parker and Dr. Hepburn are available. I see,
Yes. Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm going to keep it real brief. I just wanted to be able to share a link with everyone today. The Emory Healthy Brain Study is doing another 3-part series here called Fighting for Our Future, where we do have some researchers that are talking about some really interesting topics. Our next and final part of this webinar is going to actually be tomorrow from noon to 1. I'm going to drop the registration link in the chat. It is going to be Dr. Trammell who's joining us to talk about Alzheimer's disease and its effects in the African American community. So again, I'm going to drop the registration link here in the chat window, as well as my email address. If you have any questions or want to reach out to me, I want to make sure you can contact me that way as well too.
Thanks, Whit. And so our Healthy Brain Study is another opportunity where you can participate in research. If you're here in Georgia, we've been talking about the Healthy Aging Study that if you're 18 and over, you can participate from anywhere in the country. And that study is online. So want to learn more about the Healthy Brain Study, we strongly encourage you to grab that registration link. Sign up. It's going to be tomorrow where they're going to be talking about research interventions. And also you can learn more about how to enroll. Matt, come on in and tell us what the Cognitive Empowerment Program is going to be featuring today at 3. And then I see many more questions. So we will try to get to them as we transition to the Cognitive Empowerment Program.
Hey everyone, yeah, so in a few minutes for the CP Community Live, we're going to be doing Tai Chi today, and if you take a look in chat, if you've never participated in CP Live and you'd like to, please take a look in chat, and I just posted a link to register for our webinar. It's a very similar program to BrainTalk Live that you're in right now, and yeah, we'll be doing different programming, very similar to BrainTalk Live every week we're at from 3 to 4. So please come join us in a few minutes.
Okay, who is going to be featured today? Remind us.
Tina Rashid, she is our Tai Chi specialist.
Okay, so we kicked off BrainTalk Live with John Lewis, and again, exercise is neuroprotective. It sounds like the CEP is going to be featuring Tai Chi beginning at 3 o'clock. So if you want to join them immediately after BrainTalk Live, you can head over there. If not, Dr. Parker, is there any closing remarks or Dr. Hepburn that you want to share about our research enterprise here at Emory and all the great opportunities that we have?
All I can say, and this is what I'm trying very hard to make sure you do, that's why we do all of this, please follow up with any of the websites and the information that you've been given. Certainly the study of depression. I know that there are many people on the call who are worried about depression and dementia. And as I've said before in several of our conversations and talks, a lot of times untreated depression can look like it's dementia, but because people don't focus, they're not functional, and it can be fixed. As Dr. Dunlop said, I can fix depression, but I can't fix dementia that's related to Alzheimer's. I can fix depression. I can't do everything else. So there are different things that we can do. Somebody asked in the chat, can I get my father in the nursing home to be a part of a study? If he's mobile and he can come out for visits and you want to participate in autopsy, we'd be happy to have you. Please call our coordinators and get more specific information. And I'm going to ask this one last question here. Draw your attention to calling Natalie Zimmerman, 404-712-0212, 404-712-0212 if you are interested in participating in any of our memory studies here. And the last one is, can I get Dr. Parker as my primary care doctor? I'm on Medicare. We have several sites in the Emory system for which you can get primary care on Medicare. That's Emory Geriatrics, 404-728-6363. Emory Geriatrics, 404-728-6363. Any Emory primary care network will generally accept Medicare. And we also have GenCare. I don't have that information. Crystal can pull that up, but I've given you the numbers for geriatric primary care here at Emory. That's 404-728-6363. And being an Emory patient allows you to participate in the cognitive empowerment program that has been advertised each week. You cannot be an enrollee in the cognitive empowerment program or the structured program. That's the one where you come in here and you're monitored and you go through team visits without being a patient at Emory in the Emory Department of Neurology. So with that, I thank you. Please call Natalie, 404-712-0212 if you're interested in studies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. We will see you back here next week. And again, share with a friend. We will post a link to the recording via email and on our Facebook page. And again, thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Mom. Or push it back to well, it's the 20th one, so I think we should make it a big deal.